Recording has started? Okay. So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. This is the peer support group panel. The peer support group is another part of Columbia Synapse, and we meet every other Saturday. Members of the brain injury community usually come to these support group meetings, and we have thematic meetings where we discuss resilience, communication, maybe how your journey has been going so far, any advice that people have for coping with brain injury. And it's not only limited to those who have been through a brain injury, also loved ones are welcome to attend just to learn more about what a brain injury is and how to care for a loved one. So today we have Richard and Vivian who participate in our support group meetings, and they'll be just talking about their experience with brain injury and just how they've been going through this journey. Okay, so I'll have the questions up on the screen and we'll just go through that way. And if you have any other questions that arise, please feel free to message in the chat and we'll try to address them. Okay, and again, to those who have just joined, this meeting is being recorded. So if you're not comfortable with that, please turn off your camera. Okay. So our first question is, how did you get your injury? Just the story of how it happened, if you're comfortable with sharing, and whichever of you two would like to start off.
I'm usually first, Vivian. Up to you. In any event, maybe I will jump in there. I have my own non-medical theories about my injury and how I got it. I had a series of jobs over in the 2000s, the 2010s, that were most likely beyond what I should have been doing. I had been a financial controller for nonprofit organizations. So they tended to focus on really long hours, 16, 18-hour type job because there's seldom enough staff, and was a source of stress. For better or worse, my other source of stress was my home life at the time, a challenging marriage, and I really had no place to have downtime. Diet-wise, I ate typically snacks, too many carbs, that kind of stuff. And one day at the very end of July 2015, I was driving myself and my then wife on the Garden State Parkway. There's a section, if you don't know it, where there are 6 lanes in each direction separated by medians. If you happen to know the PNC Arts Center in Jersey, it's around there. While I was driving, in an instant, the stroke manifested itself by every car, all these lanes, 2 directions, like doubled in an instant, like really, like that. Somehow, I managed to get over to the shoulder on the left side of the road. And after a period of time, my ex called 911 and spent a few days in Jersey and was primarily treated at New York Presbyterian Hospital. For this group in particular, I would mention that Baker 17, which is the pavilion that deals with folks who have TBI, who have had strokes, other physical injuries, those guys really know what they're doing. I was inpatient for maybe around 3 weeks, during which time I had speech therapy, occupational, physical therapy, and they had the team and the equipment to make that real. At the very end of my time at New York Presbyterian, I met a recreational therapist. The gentleman gave me a tool that I use to this very day, which is called Lumosity. It's an app, and it can help you with the strength of your thinking, your ability to overcome what are cognitive deficits, which is how my stroke came to be. It really, I guess I've gone too far, Aman. I'm sorry. But it's been quite a road these last 5.5 years.
Thank you so much for sharing, Richard. And I know it's very difficult to talk about, so thank you.
Mine was more plebeian. It was 5 years ago. I was officiating at my niece's wedding in Chicago. There's still some discussion amongst the various neurologists over whether it was a blood clot that I bled into or a primary bleed. But it was a stroke. And I remember a male voice saying it was a significant bleed. My family was there because most of my family was there because we were at my niece's wedding. And as I said, there's still an ongoing discussion over whether it was a primary clot or a primary bleed. I don't really know what difference it makes at this point, other than the discussion over how to treat me to prevent further ones. So anytime I see a new physician, they often review the scans. If there's discussion of, can I go off anti-clotting medication or not, that usually comes into play. And that was the second stroke, but that's the one that left me with the deficits with which I'm dealing now.
Just as Vivian's comments gave me a reminder, my stroke was an ischemic stroke, which is a clot. And, I don't know if it makes a difference in terms of recovery or not, but it does, I guess make a difference. And like Vivian, I'm on so many medicines 5 years later. And I'm told by my internist all these years later that I have to get my weight into the 220s. I'm in the 240 now, to be quite honest about it. And have to make some progress. Only then can we talk about, reducing the number of medications I'm on. So for the time being, you just do what you got to do.
Thank you both for that. Again, this is a very difficult topic to discuss, and just, reliving what happened at that moment. So thank you for sharing that. And I think this kind of goes on to our next question. Just what were your initial thoughts when it happened? And now both of you have said that it was roughly 5 years now. So how do you feel about your brain injury now compared to initially when it happened?
At the very beginning, I was scared out of my wits. Initially, it manifested itself in literally grabbing the steering wheel in that very car for dear life, even to the point where EMTs had a tough time getting me into the ambulance. I was just frightened. Now, my stroke is to the point where I tell people I had a stroke, and the reaction is typically, "Oh, I never would have known you had one if you didn't tell me." So I guess I've made some progress.
Yeah.
I feel, like I'm recovering, and I'm comfortable with the fact that I've had a stroke.
Mine is again a little different because it happened absolutely during the wedding ceremony of my niece. My initial reaction, once I realized that it was something major, and the whole first few days in the hospital, all I was saying is, if I'm going to die, so be it. If I'm going to be devastated, so be it, but not today. It cannot be that my niece and my entire family spend the rest of their lives associating Beth's wedding day with my demise or my devastation. And I think that has been the single strongest motivating factor for me to keep pushing, for me to keep positive and to keep seeking out groups like these and conversations like these that everything has to be secondary to my niece and my family's spotlight. It can't be my stroke that takes precedence over everything else. So it's not that I don't recognize that this had a major impact, but it has to be the continuity of life for everyone else that was impacted more than me. Sorry, I always tear up at that point, because even as I was standing and then sitting down in the chair, that I don't remember who brought me the chair. I'm sure one of my sisters who is here now will remember that, but whomever brought me the chair, even as I was sitting there, all I was saying is, I am going to survive this day. Whomever is in charge of that decision, I am going to get through this. So Michael and Beth and Joanne and Eddie, that's my sister and her husband, will not have this stain on their future. And then as time went on, of course, I did all the bargaining. When I was sitting in the chair, I was thinking, if I stay paralyzed, it's okay. I started being able to count the blessings, because whatever I was going to lose, I was going to find a way to deal with everything else. But always in the context of Beth and Michael were going to have a future that did not include that I died or left who I was on the table or the ground on their wedding day. Sorry, I went a little too deep there, but that's it.
Well, thank you so much for that, Vivian. And just trying to understand what you were saying, it's very emotional, you know, and the timing for when your stroke happened was also very unfortunate timing, because like you said, it was like someone's wedding day, and I completely understand what you're trying to say, but we're all happy that you're safe and sound. And, you know,
Yes.
nothing of that sort happened, and everything's
Yeah.
okay now. Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like we just discussed about how you're feeling with your brain injury now, how was the journey just adjusting to your regular life after, or whatever normal life was for you after your injury? Because I know that's very difficult, just getting back up on your feet, trying to find a job. Maybe now you have more bills to pay because of, you know, hospitalization and medications. So, if any of you would like to share.
My adjustment to life after my stroke is that it was slow, and it was compounded by a very stressful home life. I had all the therapies initially in the hospital, then some at home, and then I returned to the hospital at New York Presbyterian once I was able to do so, and once I was strong enough, maybe a month later. I preferred the hospital. The level of care was far better than what I was getting at home. I was on short-term disability at the time from my job, and I really needed the whole time to be able to at least attempt to function at a controller, director of finance level, which is not the most straightforward job in the world. You're constantly making decisions. And that was very, very challenging for me. And it set the pattern for my career since the stroke, which is more or less evaporated. But because I recognized the situation I was in, I made some major life decisions in the short-term aftermath of my stroke, and it is without question why I am proudly ringless, if you get my drift, you know, although I would like a significant relationship.
Professionally, I was very lucky. There's a lot of reevaluation of your life when something changes so drastically. To some extent, we're lucky if you go through something like this, because it forces you to reevaluate, and perhaps you wouldn't have. But I was very lucky in that my company had mandatory retirement. So I had retired in 2011. The stroke was 2015. So whatever financial position I was going to be in, I was already in. And I was and still am surrounded by what I call a conspiracy of kindness. So there were many people there to help me physically and emotionally. Two of whom are here today, still supporting me. My husband, my other family members and friends. But I did not have to face, in practical terms, any of my physical or cognitive deficits in terms of finding a job. I just had to find my place emotionally in the world when I was looking for more activities. I didn't have to face the reality of making a living. So I'm very lucky in that regard. And my hat's off to the people who did have to face that additional burden. I didn't. My pension remained my pension. The things that all my family that used to encourage me to go out and work in the private sector, I was a coward and I didn't do that. But now I'm one of the people benefiting from a civil service pension as a result. So sometimes cowardice pays off, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's funny as you describe that, Vivian. I was thinking, oh, you must have had a nice corporate job, you know?
Well, United Nations, so yes. It was civil service in the international scale, but
Oh,
yeah.
pretty good.
In many ways, I've often said that everybody catches up to those of us who have a TBI. Eventually, everybody is going to face some change in their physical and cognitive abilities. For us, it just happens maybe earlier than one would expect, and probably more suddenly. So, so my friends who are now going through the age-appropriate changes in their physical and cognitive abilities, I often say you're not. It's not as if I'm special or it happened more uh, more specially than they. It just happened earlier and more visibly, right? So they're dealing with their own issues now, be it neuromuscularly, or now the cognitive issues are starting to happen to them also, as we hear more diagnoses of dementia or Parkinson's or MS, all of the progressive diseases that happen as we age. So we're all dealing with kind of an inventory of where we were, where we are, where we will be. And I guess I'm still answering the second part of this question. The big difference for many others as compared to TBIs is many other impact is the beginning of a progressive disease. For us, I will take MS as an example. Someone with something like that wakes up every morning thinking this is the best I'm going to be. Those of us with TBIs can wake up every morning and thinking, I'm going to get better every day. Something new is going to happen every day. That's empowering and uplifting. And for those of us who are willing to keep pushing and keep trying, we really never know how much is going to come back. Every new pain is a sign that some neuron is charging that wasn't charging yesterday. And that's not the same for a lot of the other. That's something I've learned. I might be totally wrong, neurophysiologically speaking. I don't know if I made up a word, but it's something we can tell ourselves and keep pushing through with that in mind. Whereas some of the diseases that people are facing, that's not true. So I feel now that I can keep that positivity going and keep pushing to find out maybe I will be able to use my left hand more than I can now. Who knows? Can you prove to me I won't? Can you guarantee me that I won't be able to lift? I shouldn't say it that way. Can you guarantee me that I'm as far as I can be? I don't think anyone can. So therefore, don't stop me from trying.
What Vivian is saying absolutely resonates with me. My perseverance is a defining characteristic both before the stroke and certainly after. Um, One always hopes that if you continue to work on things, that things will in fact get better. Your mind will function better for those affected physically, that they'll be able to walk and talk better than they had. Um, One of the things that's really nice about our support group is that we're a true resource for each other. And for anybody who's affected by TBI or is close with somebody, our meetings frankly rock. You know, they're really, um, and you know, we get a lot out of them.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
Very much. Very
And,
much.
and I just wanted to chime in and say that this is something that we've discussed in our meetings, that the brain is always changing and you shouldn't stop because your brain is trying to make those connections again. You can teach yourself, the skills that you had before. We had someone in our previous meeting say how they're trying to learn the languages that they knew before, right? And they're learning it again, or they're regaining their motor skills, all these different things. And like Vivian said, the idea is to keep pushing, knowing that this isn't it, it's not stagnant, there's still more room for improvement. And that's something that I've noticed. It's just a theme in all of our meetings, that even if someone is about to give up, someone in the group says, no, don't stop. This is my story, and this is what worked for me. You need to keep going. So I really appreciate that. So our next question is, hopefully this is something that will shed light to others that may have loved ones who have had a brain injury or themselves have had a brain injury. What's something that you tried during your journey, but it didn't help you? Something that just didn't work out for you? Maybe something that was recommended to you by a health professional, or something you read online and you wanted to try it out.
That didn't work.
That didn't work. You can also talk about which did work, but this one didn't.
It's a hard question for me, honestly. And I don't know if I simply forgot or if I've somehow buried it in my memory because I try to focus on what has helped.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We can do that instead. So what's something that you tried and was very successful for you and that you recommend others to try out?
Well, I would say any kind of cognitive therapy or physical therapy, oc- occupational and speech, that you can get your hands on, grab it. You know, it has all the potential in the world. And it's not like they pay me, but I do like Lumosity. It does, I found it helps. It deals with math, it deals with English, just things to make you sharper, and it intuitively knows which games you should be playing to sharpen yourself. It sees where you're weak. So, I mean, it's about 100 for a year. It is the only app I pay for, but it's worth every penny. Um, but that's what I would say.
I think the only thing that really didn't work, but mostly because I got frustrated too soon, was piano lessons. My paralysis is left-sided, and I had read early on that to help with cognitive recouping, if that's the right expression, was to learn music or a foreign language. And I had noticed early on that I had productive aphasia, and I was feeling that I wasn't expressing myself in language as well as I thought I could. So I had thought of doing either trying to regain my skills in English or one of the other languages I had studied. Then I decided piano, and I would be like Ravel, only instead of my left hand, I would use my right hand. And I did take piano lessons, but I became very frustrated with the counting the beat of the notes and reading the notes. And I stopped. I mean, I had a private teacher who was wonderful. She was very supportive and empathetic. She really related to my frustration. So it was just that I stopped early on. But so it's not really fair to say it didn't work. I didn't work at it. And I switched back to languages, which has been my go-to since I was a little kid. And I think I didn't pick language in the beginning because if I failed at learning a language again, that would have been too much for me. And I think I knew that failure would have probably devastated me. Whereas music, anyone who's heard me play violin would know that it's not unusual that I would have trouble learning an instrument. So I was comfortable with failing at that or not succeeding at that. But I totally support everything Rich said. I mean, from my personal experience, all the therapies, anyone offering you any kind of therapy, you grab it. And if they offer you an hour, ask for 5. and I often say, never say no to any of the dreaded T's, any of them. And you'll be all you can be by doing everything that's offered to you.
Upon a little further reflection, there was something I tried, was pretty bad. I lost the job. I was let go from the job that I had while the stroke happened. About, I don't know, just shy of a year later. I guess they were covering themselves. And I made a number of attempts to get back to work because even now my daughter's only 15. Back then, it was like 5th, 6th grade. I had a young child and I still do. I had to make a living. So initially I had several independent contractor jobs in nonprofit finance. And, those ran those terms, although I would tend to think if I had been more successful, they might have turned into my holy grail, a full-time job.
Mm.
Finally, at the beginning of 2019, I landed a job with New York City Campaign Finance Board, and I deliberately went down several levels. I was a senior auditor, like I was at the very beginning of my career. And this was, I guess, the last example of me putting on in crazy, crazy hours. I lived on the Upper East Side at the time. The office was in Lower Manhattan. You work the crazy hours. You're there past, say, 8, 9 o'clock at night. They send you home in a car. But the thing that was challenging was the fact that while there might be a voluminous number of rules and regs, they changed on the fly all the time. And verbally disseminated information is my weakest skill at this point. And this office ran on it. It was like their gasoline. And I just was told continually that my work was too slow, that you're not keeping up, that you have to do more. And, my reaction is the best you can do is the best you can do. All right, so slightly before COVID changed everyone's life in December of 19, they said, you're fired for cause, first time in my life. And I'm like, what about reasonable accommodations? Nothing doing. So since then, I have not really worked, and I'm attempting to make other arrangements so that my life, at least modestly, continues financially. It's a tough spot. But I do persevere. No other choice, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I'm glad to see that you're doing better now, Richard. You've been a part of our group for about a year now, and I've seen you at almost all of the meetings, and I've seen you grow and just how comfortable you've become with us and just your attitude towards everything. So I'm really happy to see that. And Vivian, I wanted to ask you just a follow-up question about something that you mentioned about learning languages, right? So how did you go about learning the language? Did you use audiobooks or did you watch shows that were in a different language that you were trying to learn to regain your cognitive abilities?
So what I did was take a language that I had studied before and sought to regain that knowledge. So primarily French at this point. And I went back to movies that are available on Netflix, for example, in French, and turn off the subtitles. So to just hear it. And I added apps on my phone for the news stations. So I'm not reading yet. I'm having trouble understanding reading, but there are a couple of French news channels, newspapers like Le Monde, which might be written at a lower level than I would normally or I would have read in the past. So I started to read those again, and I still have a fairly large collection of books in French, so I'm trying to read those. I do not actually study grammar yet, and when I get some confidence back through some of these social interactions, I'll join a meetup group with conversation with people, French speakers. I do have a lot of friends still who are French speakers, but I'm still very self-conscious about what I perceive to be a gap in where my thoughts are and where my productive language is. So I haven't yet felt comfortable to add another hurdle in that conversation level in my second and third language, which would be French and Spanish. But that would be my next thought process.
Thank you so much for sharing. Richard, did you have to add anything? I think you wanted to say something at the end.
I admire Vivian and what she's doing. I took some high school French. I can say bonjour, can count to 10, you know. But I think what you're doing is admirable. You strike me as the sort of person who, and tell me if I'm wrong, but who would read the New York Times, the New Yorker magazine. And I wanted to mention that there's some new service with the New Yorker magazine, and you can have the articles read to you. So let's say it's 1,000 pages in the article. You can listen to it for like an hour, get the story. The other thing you might want to consider are podcasts on so many different subjects.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you had mentioned to me audiobooks, and both of my sisters are avid readers, and they had also suggested audiobooks in general and podcasts and baby steps for me. I think this is one of the things I'm only recently willing or ready to admit that I might not read. I might have to give up the concept of books being fully available to me. So if I can't follow the oral word, so I've started, I'm participating with a friend of mine in a 260-day journey through the New Testament, and that has an audio feature. So we have started, we read aloud to each other every day. There's a chapter in the New Testament and then a commentary, and that does have an audio feature. So we're starting with reading to each other, and that's teaching me to track. I'm doing it left to right, but it's teaching me to be able, reading aloud is helping me with my eye tracking. And then listening to it is helping me understand the oral. So the next step would be some podcasts. And the Times language level is still a little bit too much for me.
Yeah, I think it's 12th grade, I think. You know,
Well, what grade is it, Rich?
I believe it's written at a 12th grade level.
Oh, so
Maybe from our standards. Who knows about 12th graders now? You know.
yeah. One of the great things, I mean, every once in a while I do an inventory of where I am. My nephew-in-law, maybe my niece's husband, he writes, he's an author, And for some reason, his short stories I can follow and appreciate and get lost in. And I often say, now, what is this? Is this love? Is this the beauty of his writing? Is it his style? I don't know what it is, but every time there's something new that he publishes, I devour it. And I absolutely get lost in the language and the story each time, and I can't wait for him to put something else out. So what it does is two things. It bonds me to him even more. This is the groom in the wedding that I was officiating at. But it also tells me if I can do that with his, that means someday I can do that with someone I don't know personally and love personally. So it's another little ding dong in the back of my head. The witch is dead. I just have to find out where else she's hiding and I'll be okay.
You know, Vivian, I wonder if it's the special ingredient of love,
Yeah,
you know?
it's certainly, I'll take it.
Okay.
And he has to write more, right, Joe? If you're still online, that's my sister. Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds really great. Just that's another way for you to bond, reading what he writes. And in that, you're also strengthening your cognitive abilities. Win-win situation.
Someday everybody's going to read his writings
Yes.
if he chooses to go the commercial route. I don't know what his long-term goals are, but.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next question I wanted to ask was, this is more of, so was there a time where you felt the world around you could have done better? So I think another way I'd like to rephrase this question is, has there been a time where you felt that you were discriminated against because of your brain injury? And I feel that Richard touched upon this topic already when he was telling us about the previous place he worked at. So if you had any other instances that you wanted to discuss.
In my own case, my closest part of my world, my former spouse, was, you know, no help at all and even antagonistic. I was out of the hospital for 2 weeks, and her parents had a place up in the Berkshires, and she was like, "Why don't you come?" And, you know, in a far more harsh voice than I have here. And I'm like, "Look, I got out of the hospital 2 weeks ago. I actually need to be in the city." And I had the good fortune of being on First Avenue relative to New York Presbyterian on York, within a few blocks of each other. It's like, this was insane. My former spouse always downplayed how serious my stroke was. And this was like right after, when it was obvious. Yet another reason to move on with my life. But that's my primary example, as severe as my work situations were.
Yeah, I think the medical world, for want of a better word, failed, could have done better in making information about resources available to us available early on in the recovery process. I think there could be a crib sheet of, these are resources available to the someone who's going through this. This is where support groups exist. This is adaptive gyms. This is programs, aquatic programs for therapy. This is where you can go when your insurance runs out. This is what New York has available to you. And then not even just mentioning places they recommend, but instead of forcing people who do have some limitations in terms of doing the research themselves to go online and type in adaptive gyms, if they would just hand you that piece of paper, then it saves an enormous amount of angst and worry. That was not forthcoming to me. I don't know what Rich's, well, I do know a little bit about Rich's experience because we've discussed it before. But to me, that was a big gap in my experience. Individually, I got it by asking directly of the various therapists with whom I worked. But I think that's something that should be more centrally done.
Yeah.
You
I
agree,
would
Rick?
agree with that.
Yeah. And then another thing is the navigating the insurance world. I think that could be something that, I don't know if it's the social work department at the various hospitals I've dealt with, but I think that could be better handled as a standard modus operandi in any institution you're dealing with, is someone who will sit down and just say, these are the hurdles you're going to face. This is how we can help you, instead of just sending you out into the unknown. Or when you're being discharged from a facility and here's the list of nursing homes that have rehab, and forcing your family to go on their own to not even know what they're looking for. Chances are you're not doing that research, but your spouse, your child, your sibling is dealing with the unknown of their sibling going through something like this. And on top of that, they're making unbearably difficult decisions for their loved one. I think that the medical world could be more helpful in that too.
Thank you for sharing. And whatever you just said, Vivian, everything it's a trend that I've seen for people who attend our meetings. We hear a lot of people complaining, when I went to the hospital, I didn't have the resources. They didn't give me this information. They didn't tell me how to go about paying my medical bills. My job didn't help me, and there's a lot. So what you're saying is exactly correct. And I know that someone else in our previous meetings has mentioned that they should give us, they should give people with brain injuries a booklet on, okay, this is what you do next.
Yeah, that's what I mean, I hadn't formulated this. I knew the complaint, but I hadn't formulated it into a solution until the discussion last week. When she mentioned it, I thought, oh yeah, that's such a perfect idea. It was done for me with my other medical issues. The cardiologist, the pulmonologist had a list, even in his office. These are resources you should look into for your cardiopulmonary rehab. So I thought, why doesn't that exist for neurophysical? It seems so obvious. It was a brilliant idea that should be there, could be there. I don't, who am I to talk to the whole institute? But this is where I think, Iman, you and your other colleagues, hopefully the fact that you've been so involved in a group like this, it's something that you'll, one teaches 4, teaches 8, teaches 16. So hopefully the next generation going into the field will expand on that. I think that occupational therapists, physical therapists tend to be very functional, almost blinded by the functionality of what they're teaching us to do. I mean, they're very, very geared towards improving functionality. And there's so much more to people than just how far they can walk or how many reps they can do in an activity. That's probably where I'm coming from mostly, is look at the holistic approach. Put that on the table too.
That makes sense, Vivian, really does. I guess I was extremely lucky that in the job that I had, the best benefit we had was quote unquote old-fashioned Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance. The quality of that coverage got me through quite a bit. Couldn't afford it on Cobra. It's like, $1,200 for a single person. Yikes. I mean, who has that when you're not working, really? But while I was still with them, covered virtually everything at New York Presbyterian. Not a small feat. The other thing, just to talk in terms of support, the whole reason I found Columbia Synapse is from a connection I had at NYU's Rusk, service. They help people with TBI, and if you're willing to wait many months, you can get some really good therapy there, as I have over the last year. It doesn't last forever, but it's particularly useful. And I think a ticket to getting into these things is a neuropsych exam that shows your deficits. I mean, I happen to have mine done at NYU, so maybe that smoothed the road out for me. But something for someone suffering from TBI to try to get on that road.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's a good example. The same hospital, similar path, was never mentioned to me. I'm not criticizing, I'm just relaying the information. I first heard about neuropsych through Rich at one of the Columbia Synapse meetings. So it just goes to show how the luck of the draw in terms of who your therapist is in the same program in the same hospital plays a huge part. And again, goes back to the value added of some kind of a booklet where all of the practitioners could feed in.
Yeah.
It's an enormous onus on the individual patient to even know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
I'm very, very grateful that Rich had mentioned it early on, because the next day I sent a note to the neurologist who is my primary neurologist at NYU to start asking, okay, why can we look into this for me? Had I not heard about it through Rich, I would not have even known to ask the question.
Yeah. And just to underscore, this is how we all, it's only one example of how we all support each other
Yes.
in Columbia Synapse group. And,
Yes.
I just want to say in Iman, we have a really, really great leader. And you do a great job, Iman, really.
Yes.
And,
Yes, I underscore that with an exclamation point after.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. And it's really great having you guys at our meetings. It's I really enjoy coming to the meetings and leading it and just learning from you all. And my final question, just before we wrap up, it's a happier question, is what are some things you appreciate about those around you, those that have been with you throughout this journey and helping you recover?
I am profoundly fortunate that my mom, my sister and brother have been towers of strength for me. When my daughter was young, her level of understanding as well. I've been very lucky to have the services that I've been able to navigate to. So all the professionals, my family, my friends, that's basically it. And our group, obviously. Sorry, but it makes a difference.
Rather than mention the individuals, I'd focus on the things that I appreciate about those around me. I think first and foremost is not letting me get away with the self-pity, calling me on it, and not letting me pull the stroke card too often. Sometimes I'm entitled. Because so there are different people at different times in my life who will say, this time I will call her out by name. No, Mom, you did that before. So in case she ever watches this tape, she'll know I'm talking about her. But she will often say, she's just as likely to throw my clothes at me and say, figure it out. But that's not letting me get away with the self-pity time, as she is to say, no, Mom, you were a B before, just like you're being a B now. I appreciate both of those things. And there are the others who are just coming back for more all the time. And I'm not mentioning them by role or by name because I hope that I've gotten out of the B mode often enough to let them know who they are. Friends and family that have just stuck with me, as Rich is implying, even through all the pontificating anger that I have disproportionately thrown at them, even though they have altered their lives and given things up to be there for me. So I appreciate all of that more than I think I've said. I try to remember when I go through the inventory of things to be grateful for, that's without that kind of physical and emotional safe zone, there is no getting through the days, and there's no looking forward if you don't have that grounding in today and that comfort of before, from the people that know you and love you anyway. So I'm very appreciative for all of that.
Thank you both. And I'm really glad that both of you have such strong support systems that have led you to where you are now, that you've persevered, you've grown throughout this entire time. Like you said, it's been 5 years now, and you guys are still healthy and going strong. So I'm really glad to hear that. I wanted to thank you both again so much for volunteering your time and speaking with us today. It really means a lot to me that you just, you decide to hop on and just share your experience for others to learn about what a brain injury is like and how to just, I guess, make the journey more bearable or, easier to get through. And whoever watches this recording later on, I hope that they learned a lot from whatever we discussed today.
Keep pushing. Recovery is not linear. Anybody you talk to, remember, it's not linear. Don't look back at yesterday, look back 3 months ago and then take inventory. And you'll, I think, find the strength to keep moving. Thank you all at Columbia Synapse. And wherever you're going after graduation, they're lucky to have you, as were we.
Thank you so much.
I second what Vivian has mentioned. Also, obviously, wish you guys the best of luck.